Hello, Rachel. How are you?
Hi, Sean. Good. How are you?
Not too bad. Comfortably doing this one from home. So, of which I know you are as well, even though we can't tell because you're hiding behind the back screen there.
Yeah, I am at home. It's been a common theme for over 4 months now. So,
We are recording this in the middle of a pandemic. So, wherever you can find space to do a recording, that's how it works now.
exactly. Quiet space.
Quiet space. Well, I don't know about that. I've been on a few. Um, anyway, I want to thank you very much for doing this. I can't wait. This was one of again, I tell people, the people who have been in on the early recordings, you were one of the first that I've thought about because of what you do.
hmm
And that's why you're on this show, and that's what we're going to talk about. But first, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. If this is your first time doing so, welcome to Did You Know That? With a question mark at the end. This is a channel where I get to talk to interesting people about interesting things and to annoying people about annoying things. And Rachel is not annoying, though some of you may find her topic annoying or frustrating. Actually, that's a better word, frustrating. And we'll get into that. If you're a returning member, thanks very much. I'm glad you're checking in again. Regardless, please make sure that you subscribe with the bell so that you'll get notified each time a video gets posted, which I will be doing once a week. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sean O'Rourke. This is my passion project. And when I'm not working on this passion project, I'm basically preparing companies to be hacked as a cyber liability consultant. So Rachel, now you get to tell people what you do.
Thank you, Sean. Well, I think you hyped it up a little too much.
No.
Rachel Harding. I'm a partner at Falcon, Rapport, and Berkman. Our main offices are out in Long Island in Rockefeller Center and in New York City and in Manhattan. And I am an election law and campaign finance attorney, which is why I'm here today to speak about that topic. So I look forward to a lively discussion.
Well, tell folks what the other half of your business is as well.
So I also do trust and estates, which is the more common area of the law. So from the planning to the administration to the litigation, and do that as well. And my firm is a small firm, but it's a full service firm.
Okay. So while trust and estates is an interesting topic, I didn't want to go so macabre, and plus the fact I wanted people to be angry. So I decided we're going to talk about election law and finance, because I know this is a very hot topic, especially now we are in an election year, presidential, federal, state, and local, all across the board. So to that end, first of all, are you national or are you specific to New York in terms of your work?
Yeah, so I'm specific to New York. That doesn't mean that if you're running for federal office, like if you're running for Congress within a New York district, we do represent candidates in that capacity. But mainly I stick to the state of New York.
Okay. Yeah, there's enough going on there to keep you busy.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Okay. So the first question that I had before we get into how you help people is, how do you actually become a candidate for any office, again, federal, state, local, if you're in New York State?
Yeah, well, you hire me, obviously, but how
That's
you
question
actually,
two. Don't jump,
yeah.
don't jump the order here.
It's all about filing with the proper boards. In the federal process, the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, is the board. On the state level, it's the New York State Board of Elections, the BOE, and then New York City has their own board because we're New York City, and that's the New York City Campaign Finance Board, otherwise known as the CFB. So it really depends on what seat you're running in, and then that determines who you file with. All of them have very different forms to file, but the basis is file a form, get an EIN. You're active like a business, and people forget a campaign's a business. So you still have to go to the IRS website, obtain an EIN, open up a bank account. Remember, you're a business now, and then at that time you're off to the races to fundraise, and you must have a treasurer. And getting a treasurer is a very, very complicated task because it is all the risk and none of the reward. So good luck getting a treasurer.
Okay, well, we'll talk about that
Mhm.
in a second. So it doesn't matter. Do you have to qualify for an election, or do you just file with the board and you're immediately on a ballot?
Yeah, so those are two different questions. I'll take
Okay.
them. Anyone can file. The board doesn't, none of the boards vet right away whether you're qualified to run. And many times the difference between qualified is if you're qualified in a specific party, that's a big one, or in the district. People move around a lot. Again, and you're going to hear this a lot, it depends what you're running for, because each of the three, federal, state, and local, actually have their different rules as to what it means to qualify, especially to be a resident, what that means as to whether or not you can run in office. So you just really need to make sure you know what office you're running for, because some can literally be the day you're elected, you just have to prove residency, or it could be months or years before you're elected, you have to prove residency. But it's not so much when you file, but more when you're elected. And a lot of times that's more for the opponent or the opposing political party to determine whether or not you're qualified. The other qualifications are party enrollment. New York, for primaries, are closed primaries right now. So a lot of people actually get kicked off or don't run because there's a misunderstanding as to what parties they're qualified for. Balloting is a whole separate animal. Anyone can apply to run for office and be a candidate, but then there's a balloting process, which is a set schedule. Now all the primaries are in June, so the balloting process happens in February now, and that's a completely different beast where attorneys get involved. A lot of people have to get their signature requirements, appearing in front of the board. So anyone can run for office, and it's a matter of, are you able to get on the ballot and stay on the ballot is another question.
So it sounds like it's a fairly onerous process, and that's why you have a job that you do, is it not? So what do you do? So you made the joke and skipped the question that they would come and hire you, but is that essentially how it works? Is that if I wanted to run for office, my first call is going to be to Rachel Harding?
Yeah, yes, is what I like to believe is the answer and what should be the answer. But unfortunately, that's not the realistic answer, or the practical answer, I should say. People call me for a plethora of reasons, and it's not just when they usually call attorneys when they're in trouble, although certainly I get those calls as well from political candidates. But it's people realizing they don't want to mess up the filings. Every entity, every board has their own public disclosure statement filings on a calendar. So it's helping them because that's public. So if you mess that up, the public's going to see it. So a lot of times that's more the finance side of it. I help campaigns with their public disclosures. And again, setting up paperwork is onerous, and it's not easy. So making sure that it's properly filed, because you don't want to blunder when you're right out of the gate. That's not really a good PR play, and that will follow you the whole race. And then balloting is huge, making sure the signature requirements are there, and not only making sure you're on the ballot, but that you stay off the ballot. And if you so choose, you try to kick others off the ballot to obviously increase your chances. And balloting it seems like an easy process. You just sign a form and you're off to the races. There are a lot of technicalities, even down to the color of the ink that you can use on a ballot. And when you can sign things, putting page numbers on the bottom. So it seems simple and elementary, but in practice, it's far from it. And a lot of people get kicked off. Up until only a few years ago, you even had to provide a fax number. I mean, besides doctors and lawyers, who else uses faxes? And a lot of these candidates who did it themselves, their excuse was, I didn't receive notice. And the board said, well, you don't have a fax. You didn't give a fax number. And they're like, who the heck has a fax number these days? So election law is old. It actually has been updated a lot in the past 2 years, to their credit. But it still has a lot of work ahead. And
as you have basically demonstrated, politics really is a contact sport. because there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes. And by the way, let's diverge for a second. So New York had a very famous residency battle when Hillary Clinton ran for Senate, and all of a sudden was no longer a Cubs fan, but was a Yankees fan.
There's been a few mayors who have switched their allegiance too in the recent history.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, was Hillary really a resident, or was it basically she, again, since you said it was at the time of election, had she done enough to become a true resident of New York State by that time?
Yeah, had she done enough? Yes, right? Enough is the bare minimum. And actually, over the past, I think about 4 years now, there has been significant amounts of litigation, even the higher courts addressing the residency issue. And it does make it clearer and easier now to be a resident, but it also lays out, because a lot of people will break their residency. They'll be in New York, go down to DC, work for someone in DC for a year or two, come back to New York and run for office, right? Well, you were in DC for a few years. So what does that mean? Did you break your residency? And you have to show intent and everything else. So it really is up to the court's interpretation, a lot of it. But like I said, recently the court has tightened it a little bit more, and thankfully has made a clearer path for attorneys and candidates as to what that residency means, and that you can't break it, and you really have to show your intent to be in the jurisdiction where you want to run for office.
And that's something actually tax attorneys go through quite often, especially with a state like New York, and when high net worth individuals sort of want to escape the New York tax system, but not necessarily New York City itself. I mean, that's what keeps tax attorneys in business as well.
Tax filings are introduced as evidence often in those type of cases.
Okay, so before we go totally far afield, let's get back. I'm looking at my questions to make sure I go in order, because sometimes I do skip around and it can
that's really fine. And I will say, Sean, also to go back a little bit, the other thing that we do, which is a very hot topic now, is voter protection, right? And in this day and age, that means absentee ballots. In the primary this past time in June, ballots weren't even certified until a month later, and that's because there were many people in a room during COVID counting every single ballot of districts to make sure they're fine, because it was 3 times, I believe the number is 3 times the rate of normally, and obviously due to what's going on in the pandemic around us. So that was a huge issue, and it is going to be a huge issue in November as well, which the presidents and the candidates and everyone else have already alluded to. So it's going to be interesting how that plays out. But we also will do voter protection fraud and assist people with the absentee ballots, making sure candidates are on top of it, and if need be, after election day, go in and count those votes and be litigious if necessary.
So that's actually fairly interesting. So you, as a representative of the candidate or a legal representative, would be able to go in and count absentee ballots to make sure that they're counted correctly, or do you stand over somebody else's shoulder and watch as they count them?
So the Board of Elections staff are the ones that kind of, let's say, open it up, right? But they actually show it, right? So they have it, they show it to whomever is at the table. And it's not just the attorneys, because surprisingly, there aren't enough of us. How often do you hear that? Who do this line of work, and it would be quite costly to the candidate and the campaign. So they, the attorneys many times the ones that train volunteers or staff of the campaign to do as well. So the way it's set out is there's, you just think of a room, a large room with multiple long tables. And, there's a Board of Election staff member at each table, and if, people on all representing the candidates at each table, and the staff member shows the ballot, and even just showing the ballot without even opening up, there could be issues. And then from there, they open it up and everyone has a chance to view it. So the attorney doesn't open it up, that's a staff member, but everyone at the table has a chance to review it and object and make, and say whether or not they believe that's a valid vote or an invalid vote. So whether it should be counted or not.
So come November, we could have the same situation, at least here in the state and the local.
Oh, it's expected to. People have already, I'm not going to say conceded to it, but it would be, everyone would be shocked if we didn't. Although New York, I'm not going to, be so bold as to say, who New York is going to go for. But even with that being said, there are other races. It's not just the presidential race that's going on. Yeah. So in many different counties and jurisdictions in the state, there will definitely be the same issue as in June. The only issue which hopefully will be circumvented is there was a postmarking issue where ballots didn't have to be postmarked based off of the return, like the self-addressed returned envelope that the BOE gave. The post office didn't postmark all of them and most of them. So there was no way of proving to some whether they were returned timely in order to be counted. That has since been litigated and that has since been changed. So hopefully at least that issue as to whether or not the ballot was timely received will not be a factor in November, but everything else probably still will.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't think on the federal levels, it will make, at least here in New York, it's not going to make one bit of difference because you pretty much know who's going to win federally in this state. It's the local stuff that is going to be interesting to watch. And again, we could have to wait a month for a victor to be declared, but now I understand why it takes so long. Because everybody's sitting around the table looking at hanging chads and whatever. So,
and because of COVID, there's fewer people that are allowed to.
That's true.
Right.
That's
so
true.
it was never a fast process, but it was faster. But now because of COVID and the restrictions, it's even slower than what it was.
Oh boy, this is going to be fun.
Something to look forward to.
Yeah. You don't plan to be in any one of those rooms, right? To quote a Broadway show, be in the room where it happens. We'll see what happens. Yeah. All right. Well, everybody keep a watch on what Rachel's doing and what have you. You'll know what's going on in New York election histrionics. Okay. So the next question I have starts to delve into the money side of things. And this is really where things are constantly talked about by both sides. And both sides sort of talk out of both sides of their mouth. They criticize out of one, and then they thank their donors out of the other type of deal. So when a candidate in New York is running for office, it's even at the local level, it's not cheap to do all this. Just based on what you explained, it takes a lot of time and money and effort from individuals, and some of those can't be volunteers. They have to be paid. So what are the rules, the laws, the restrictions around who can give money, how much they can give, to whom they can give, so on and so forth? Yeah.
So again, a large part of this answer is going to be, it depends what you're running for. Sure. The city, because the city right now, and the state will follow in a few years, the city for a while has had a matching fund system. So they actually match contributions for the candidates who opt into the program. Because of that, the limits are extremely low. Because rightly so, if the city is going to give you money, they expect in return you not to get $20,000 checks from individuals. And that's the purpose of it, to take the corruptness, if that's the goal, out of it. So with that being said, on a city level, there are two different contribution limits for citywide. So that would be public advocate, controller, or mayor. It's either $2,000 an individual can give, and that's through a whole cycle, not a primary versus general. If you give someone $2,000 3 years before the election, you're tapped out for the whole election.
Gotcha.
Or $5,100. It's very technical as to what the difference in numbers is. There's two different programs going on now, but after the 2021 election, which is the next city election, it will just be $2,000. Or if you do not opt into the program, then it's $5,100. And a candidate themselves, if they're in the program, can give 3 times the amount that anyone else is allowed. And if they're not in the program, a candidate can spend as much as they want. So that's where you have the Bloombergs of the world coming in and running for mayor or running for office, period. With respect to outsiders, the city only allows political action committees, PACs, who are registered with them. And again, they can only give individual amounts. So most PACs can only give $2,000 amount, which is not a lot. The way to circumvent that is with independent expenditures, which, a lot of well-known unions or PACs do create independent expenditures, because then while they can't coordinate, and coordinate being the key, with the campaigns, they can still assist either a proposition, a candidate, or oppose a candidate, whatever they so choose. The state is very different. Again, the state's much more complicated with respect to who can give. They recently had new LLC rules to tighten that, because before even an LLC could give to 2 candidates and as many candidates. Now the New York state rules, I just looked up because everything keeps changing, of course, with inflation and everything else. So on the primary side, statewide, so like governor, it actually depends what office what party line they're running on, Democrat, Republican, and all the other recognized parties. So the primary, Democrat being the highest amount, is $22,600. And in the general, it's $47,100. So it's a nice chunk of change that individuals can give. And then if you're actually a family member, you can give even more. In federal, it's now $2,800. And again, that's per cycle. So 28 in the primary, 28 in the general. So that's about the amount. Due to case law, like everything else is case law, you can give to as many campaigns as you want. So if you wanted to give $2,800 to every Democratic primary going on in the country, you certainly could. There's nothing to prevent you. All the contribution limits are for an individual are per candidate. Yeah.
Okay. So then why do people, so if the dollars are controlled to a certain extent, why do people scream about money in politics so often?
Because of political action committees and independent expenditures. They have larger play in both the state and federal. They're not as controlled as they are in the city. And also they'll act as independent expenditures as well. So you can't-
Let me stop you there. What's an independent expenditure?
So independent expenditure is, take the police union, right? The police union opens up, and I'm not saying they did or they should. I'm just the first that came to mind. They're supporting a candidate, right? And so what they do is they open up an independent expenditure, and they almost act as a campaign themselves. So they create a name, right? Cops for whomever, right? Or cops for NYC. And there's certain requirements and certain disclosures that they have to do as well, just like campaigns. And they pretty much run a campaign. They can run ads, they can do palm cards, flyers, make calls, whatever. They just need to make sure that people understand that they're calling from their, i.e. cops for NYC, and not for a candidate, Joe Smith for NYC. And then the two can't talk. So anyone who's playing with the independent expenditure cannot speak with anyone on the campaign. So it's almost as if a separate campaign. I'm not going there.
Yeah. I will poke the bear. I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, but on the federal side, that's really where the money comes in, because that's where corporations come in. That's where individuals with a boatload of money come in and are able to really put their money into these PACs, these political action committees, or super PACs, as on the presidential side, many of them are referred to, and really funnel money in there and support or oppose a candidate that way. So when people talk about a lot of money in the system and dark money, most of the time they're talking about the PACs and the independent expenditures more than they're talking about the campaigns themselves.
So you used the police union, but it could be any union. And does it have to be a certified union?
Nope, because anyone can open up a PAC. Again, just like anything else, you have to have a bank account, show accounting. You know, you're gonna leave yourself vulnerable a little bit. You need a treasurer. You don't have to be a union. There are many unions that don't do it. You know, just people who are fed up and are really rich and want to put a little more money behind a candidate. They do that as well. So they, you know, go out and get a treasurer, and they're off to the races.
Now, in my experience, in my reading, a lot of this, the finger pointing on the money side is pointed at the Republican Party, but the Democrats are not paupers, and they're not making do with just, you know, constantly reusing pencils and paper clips to save money.
Yeah.
Both sides of the aisle are very well funded, and this is a strategic plan across the board.
It is, and it's very difficult because, you know, we tell clients all the time, you need money to play in the game, right? There's no denying it. You need money in order to be a serious candidate. And that's even proven sometimes at the things that are required, at least on the city level, to be on a debate stage at times is actually based off of how much money you've raised and spent. So you need to show people you have money, but that's the qualification that people see to show you're a serious candidate. You know, but if you choose the path of, you know, I'm not going to take money is evil, I'm going to limit everything by, you know, a 20th, then you're going to lose, right? So you have to, unfortunately, when you're in the game, and this happens a lot, you know, they say you have to play the game to be in the game, right? But when they're in the game, they're going to change the game. Well, unfortunately, there's a lot of politicians out there that when they're in the game, they like the game, right? And they want to stay in the game. And that's kind of where the divide comes in, I think. And while people have criticized, and, you know, I should say that professionally, I am nonpartisan. So, you know, when I talk about Republican or Democrat or any other party, this is, you know, opinion, not business, and, you know, based off of the facts as I know them. I think a lot of, you know, people think that Republicans have more money, although I think if you look at the current billionaires in the U.S., it would say something else.
Oh, yeah.
But, you know, unfortunately, the fact is that the two big recent campaign finance Supreme Court rulings were done when it was more swayed towards the Republicans. The Republicans on the bench were the ones who voted for it, and it was kind of a divide because both were 5-4, and it showed that divide and swing vote. So, well, you know, that just kind of upheld.
Right?
Yeah, so that just kind of, you know, I think put the nail on the coffin as to people believing that this is one party or the other. But again, I think in this day and age, a lot of the money is in the Democratic Party, and they might use it differently or collect differently. You know, special interest groups, real estate, they're always saying they're not going to accept from, and that's fine. Everyone has a right to say who they are or are not going to accept money from, but there's still serious money everywhere to be had, especially in the U.S.
Well, and that's why, I mean, I look at somebody like Elizabeth Warren. She's been in the Senate for a while now and has the national and local to her state name to where she doesn't have to accept money. She can just run on her name and the recognition of her name. But if you were going to try to do that as Sean O'Rourke from New York City, and I was going to try to do that on a shoestring, there's no way that I'm going to overcome that inherent advantage that her name recognition has.
Right.
And so money does have to play a part, because you just have to cut through so much noise to get people's attention. And let's be honest, I'm a history dork, very proud to say that, but the American populace, when it comes to voting, is very blasé. We don't do a lot of homework. We don't really look. We look at the name that we recognize, and that's why incumbents win so much more often than new candidates. But New York City has term limits, except for one election cycle that.
There were still limits, but they changed slightly.
But they got to where it was a one-off exception. Yes. Now, those term limits, do you think they are better in terms of limiting the amount of influence money has, or do you think they're possibly worse? I know it's kind of like an unanswerable question, so I'm just asking for your opinion and
Yeah,
educated thoughts.
I don't think they're better. I'm not sure if they're just irrelevant or worse. And I say that because once you're an incumbent in whatever seat you're in, right? You're in it. You have the money. Presumably you have the party backing. That's not always the case, but usually the case. But for the city, the state and feds, having your party behind you does help from a financial and political and volunteer base for sure. And money can be rolled over, right? So you can still keep raising money, and even if you're term limited out, go on to the next seat. I mean, people have started at city council, gone from city council to, and sometimes depending on when you get in, like if you get in during a special election, you could be there for more than 2 terms, right? You could be there for 10, 11 years technically, and then keep raising money and go to borough president or controller, public advocate, mayor, Congress president, whatever. Like the sky's the limit. So I think it's the same. I guess it really depends on the limits themselves, right? And if you're switching between different jurisdictions, like if you switch between Congress to state to city, then you're going to lose some of the cash behind you, but you still have the name recognition and you presumably still have the power and the party backing. So I'm not sure how much term limits affect people or candidates financially.
Okay, so you make an interesting point. Then if I'm a candidate and I get elected,
Mm-hmm.
I can keep my campaign money forever, right? As long as I'm running for office of some sort. So to your example, I run for city council, then I run for mayor, then I run for governor, then I run for senate, then I run for president. Basically, that campaign coffer that I started with on city council could follow me all the way through the presidential election. Yes? No?
Yeah, so presumably yes, but the amount, it depends, because again, once you kind of cross jurisdictions, and even within your own, there are still contribution and expenditure limits and what are called transfers. And sometimes that would be considered a transfer to additional campaign, because when you have a new campaign, even if that's for re-election, that's a new campaign. So, like you can't, like if I was running for the first time for city council, I couldn't say Rachel for city council, and then I won, and my re-election was also Rachel for city council. It'd have to be something else, Rachel for city council 2025 at that point or whatever, to distinguish the two. So there are, and there's different bank accounts. So there are things in place so you don't, raise a boatload of money and don't spend it and then just be able to transfer the whole kitty into the next. But there are certain requirements where it does allow you to transfer. And again, as to how much that transfer is, depends on where you're transferring from.
Gotcha. Okay. And this is a public service announcement from both Rachel and myself. Do not spend it on stuff that are not related to campaigns, right?
That is very true, yes.
Don't be going taking vacations, building homes and what have you with other people's campaign money. That it doesn't work out well for people.
It doesn't. They all, things are public records. You're always gonna, especially in a big campaign, you're always gonna upset someone, and there's whistleblowers happen often. Again, based off of where you're running as to what's considered to be part of the campaign or not. In New York City, you can't, I know this sounds silly to some people, but it actually makes sense to some point. You can't even have like a hair appointment, or if you get your makeup done for a debate or something, that isn't even a legitimate campaign expense in the eyes of the city. Although you could argue, but for running for office, you wouldn't have, especially for a male, many times, you wouldn't have had the makeup done and the hair and whatever else. You would have just, showed up to work. Right. So it does depend too where you're running as to what you can try to spend on. And I do tell people that you can usually tell who is employed during their running for office and who took a leave of their job or who is unemployed. based off of whether or not they expense their Metro cards. That's the key, and they are allowed, especially in the city. But usually, if you have, you don't want to deal with it. But listen, it can add up sometimes. So people always want to know, and I say, look there first. It's not foolproof, but it's the best way to look at from a disclosure standpoint.
Yeah, look at that, literally inside information. And you're right. Look, if you get a monthly, it's $127 a month. And if your campaign's 10 months, I mean,
it's
you're
serious
right,
money. Yeah.
So actually, you issued a warning at the beginning of this conversation about being a treasurer. And so what role and what liabilities does a treasurer accept when they're the treasurer of a campaign?
So I'll answer the last question first. Liability, you're jointly and severally liable, the treasurer and the candidate, which is scary. So if the candidate messes up, the treasurer messes up, and vice versa. So all liability is the short answer to it. Okay. As to the role, it truly depends on the campaign. There are many different ways a treasurer can play. A treasurer can just be a name, right? You're like, you talk to a friend, listen, I'm begging you, I just need I need a name, whether you have an agreement saying, you'll take all the liability and the treasurer believes you or not, that's between the candidate and the treasurer. But everyone else in the office does all the treasurer work. And the treasurer work consists of, doing the bookkeeping, making sure the balance sheet is clear, and then most importantly, the filings, making sure that the filings are proper, are clean, and most importantly, are timely filed, and dealing with the different boards that the campaign deals with.
Now I understand why you said good luck finding a treasurer, because if you're in bed with a candidate and whatnot, that's putting a lot of trust in somebody else's ethos. Okay, so we're running up against the time, and I knew we would, unfortunately, because I have so many other questions, but I do want to get to one question that I did write down, and you mentioned it before, were the two rulings by the Supreme Court. And I think the one that, actually I can't say most people will know because maybe they won't, but it's the Citizen United one is the one that really gets pointed at most often as being what opened the floodgates or allowed the floodgates to stay open. So can you just summarize that? And then as much as you could possibly say on what you're thinking about it is about the ruling.
Yeah, so I guess to summarize it, because that's what everyone hears about, it's the corporations are people, and so they're protected by the First Amendment, free speech, and the courts have previously determined that giving money is a protection for free speech. So if I'm allowed to give money and whatever amount that may be, and that's my entitlement as under the First Amendment, then corporations can too. And then that kind of goes back to what we talked about as far as where the super PACs come in and the IEs come in, because then it then allows them to really open the floodgates, as you said, as to put as much money as they want into their super PACs or into the IEs, again, for the support or the opposition, usually of a candidate. As to, my opinions are on the matter.
I mean, as much as you can. I know this is a topic that hits right at home for what you do.
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting ruling. I think a lot of people didn't think it would sway that way. And my personal thoughts are, if you kind of really go back and find out what happened, it really was a power play between Republicans to Democrats to Republicans again. And I think maybe because of those that were on the bench at the time saw that, because it started obviously years ago. The opinion was in 2010. I believe it started Bush and Kerry time. I think there was a sense of unfairness to Citizens United when this first happened, and in my opinion, that was a lot of a political play as to the underlying issue. And all of this was actually about documentaries being released as to back in Fahrenheit 9/11, whether or not that was electioneering. So I think it got a little personal, and that's why it happened. As to whether or not I agree with it, I'm not going to say that here, but I do think it's an interesting case. I think the opinions are well written. So for those that are into the law, whether they like the decision or not and haven't read it, I do recommend it because it was a time on the bench, where there were some great writers, and it certainly was thought about. Let's put it that way. It wasn't just scrapped on paper.
And before we go, correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I only play a lawyer on these videos.
Yeah.
The corporation as a person actually was addressed in previous rulings, was it not?
Yeah.
Citizens United basically just reaffirmed previous rulings about the state or the concept of a corporation as person. So to that end, it was, to your point as well, there's a lot of outside influences on this. The documentary Fahrenheit 9/11 that you mentioned, and so entertainment is into this, documentaries, and it's all over the place. So I mean, it's no easy thread to pull and just say take the money out, because the money's going to go somewhere.
And I think that, there's been a lot of cases, even back, to 1976, like the main the main campaign finance case, Buckley versus Vallejo, which a lot is still valid. This is not a new topic, right? This is not recent. This has been a thing for quite some time. I just think, in 2010, in that time, and one could say in this time too, corporations, people have this sense of evilness to it. So I think it was a very easy case to hate, because it gave power to corporations and equated corporations to people. And I think that left a bad taste in people's mouths. But again, I will say, I think it was, I enjoyed reading the opinion in law school. I've obviously read the opinion many times since then too, as well as Buckley versus Vallejo, which I was told is actually the longest opinion by the Supreme Court, so that is not an easy read. And there's other ones in 2014, which one could say goes the other way, which is what I said, McCutcheon versus the FEC, where it allows people to make as many contributions to a campaign as possible. It upheld that. So, it's saying that, you're not gonna be beholden to make a contribution to a congressperson. You can make it to another congressperson within that 2 years. No one's gonna stop you. Okay. And it's unconstitutional to stop you, more importantly.
Very, very true. And people just seem to forget a lot of this is built around how they interpret that document and in today's standards. But
right. But it is ironic how, again, going back to Buckley, that they do say they limit the individual, because they do recognize that there is room for corruption with certain amounts of money. So that always is in everyone's mind, and I think everyone kind of agrees with it. It's just, how does that play to our Constitution?
Well, it also, how does it play to us as the voter, being a little bit more critical than just buying everything that we see either online now, on TV, on the radio, wherever. I've become even more cynical in my old age, to where I believe nothing now. I need 3 confirmations before I'll believe anything, and even then I'm a little doubtful. So
that's true.
But that's just
and
me.
With the public financing system that the city has and the state is going to have, and a few other jurisdictions have as well, that's the point of creating individual limits that are so small to take that corruption out of it. But again, you still have to allow independent expenditures. So while you can't have the millionaires and billionaires giving checks of $5,000, which in my mind, New York City isn't astronomical, right? Like, it's a lot of money to me, but there are a lot of rich people in New York City. So do I really think that if a candidate got a $5,000 check, that would persuade them to do something? I'm not quite sure. Yeah. I'm not convinced of that. Many in city council disagree with me, but fine. But that's where the public financing system comes in hopes of at least reducing the limits. You can stop the corruption and the quid pro quo and play to play options.
Well, and again, I'm going to be one more cynic here. I think they did that because it helps the incumbents. And so it makes the incumbents much stronger if you're playing with an equal financial field. it makes their names much more recognizable.
So their purpose behind it was the opposite, but I entirely agree with you. And I've actually been public in against these rules for that reason. I think it is the Incumbent Protection Act is what they're doing this. And it's not for getting people out not only to vote, but also other people to run for office. And again, this is New York City specific I'm talking about right now. But their goal was to get people to run who aren't career politicians. And while people will run, I don't think, this is going to help them win. So maybe their goal is fulfilled. More people will run, and their goal wasn't for these people to win. I don't know. So I guess it's a technicality.
And that's where we're going to leave it, because we can keep going. Believe me, we can keep going.
Yes.
I told Rachel before we started recording that I had innumerable questions that I had cut off from the ones I had sent her because I knew, and we've gone over, this will be so far the longest video I've recorded.
I'm shocked that a lawyer went over.
Not at all, because I'm not paying you by the hour. So I'm fine with it. We can go as long as we need to. But Rachel, that was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean. This is great.
I hope everybody was a little less frustrated after this. Or it just confirms your suspicions that money is the root of all evil. Whichever it is, I want to thank everybody again for joining. Did you know that? For Rachel Harding, I'm Sean O'Rourke. Make sure you hit the subscribe button with the bell so that you'll get notified when other interesting videos like this one's come about. And until next time, Rachel, you be well. Everybody out there in the ether, be well as well. And talk to you later.